As part of our ongoing series about famous Hollywood murder mysteries, on today's show we will be discussing the murder of Hollywood's most famous publicist, Ronni Chasen. It was a murder that rocked Hollywood to its core on the evening of November 16th, 2010. After leaving the premiere of the movie Burlesque, Hollywood's most powerful publicist, Ronni Chasen, was murdered, shot 4 times from the passenger side of her Mercedes E350 as she drove through Beverly Hills. The Beverly Hills Police Department has considered this case closed after Harold Smith, who authorities believe was the alleged murderer, and committed suicide as police were coming to speak with him. But there are many that believe that Harold Smith had nothing to do with the murder and believe that this was a professional killer that killed Ronni Chasen. This show will delve deep into what happened on that fateful night. All right. Welcome back, folks. Folks, joining me on the phone this afternoon is investigative journalist and filmmaker Ronni Katzenbach, who is producing and directing a documentary called 638, The Death of Ronni Chasen. Ryan has done extensive research and in-depth investigation into the death of Hollywood's most famous publicist, Ronni Chasen. He joins me today to talk about this fascinating murder and what he believes happened on that fateful night. Ryan, first of all, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me. I appreciate being here.
Let's just delve right. First of all, can you give my brief background about yourself, and then maybe a brief background about people in my audience that don't know who Ronni Chasen was.
Okay. Well, I think Ronni Chasen is a lot more interesting than what I am. But I'm basically just a documentary filmmaker. I've done a couple of very interesting projects, and have been working on the Chasen case for about the last 6 years or so. And I started following it the day that it happened. Basically, Ronni, to cut to the quick here, because I think she is such an interesting lady and in a very interesting case. Ronni Chasen was a publicist that got her start in the 1970s working for the premier PR agency in Los Angeles, Rogers & Cowan.
Right.
And she represented clients like, the agency represented clients like Paul Newman and I believe John Travolta at one point. And so she kind of got her feet wet, and she was very good, very, very good in the PR business, made a lot of friends, made a lot of allies. And she worked for Rogers & Cowan for a while, and then she went off on her own in 1994 and started her own company called Chasen & Company, PR. And basically worked with a lot of musicians and a lot of producers and a lot of different individuals up until the time of her death in November 2010. So in terms of what happened in the actual crime itself, Ronni went on the evening of November 15th, 2010, to the Chinese Theater, and she was there for the premiere of the movie Burlesque. And they went to the premiere. They went to the after party down the street at the W Hotel. Everything seemed perfectly normal, typical routine night. Ronni, during awards season, I've been told, was out probably just about every night, working on behalf of her clients and whatnot, working the awards circuit. And so she left the W Hotel in Hollywood at about midnight, and she drove home, routine, normal drive home, which would take her through the heart of Beverly Hills on Sunset Boulevard. And when she arrived at the intersection of Sunset and Whittier, she stopped and was waiting on the green arrow to make a left-hand turn onto Whittier. And at this point, everything is a little unclear as to what happened. The only thing that we do know is that an individual, an assailant, came up to the passenger side window and shot 4 times into the car and hit her 4 times. Pretty tight cluster of shots. She took a wound to the back, one into the shoulder, another one into the chest, and a second one into the chest. And she managed to turn the car left, and she guided the car for about a quarter of a mile down Whittier before she ultimately lost control of it and ran the car up on a curb, and she hit a concrete utility post. At that point, of course, there are a number of neighbors that call it in to 911, report a solo vehicle collision. The police arrive. They're kind of a little, I think, baffled by the situation, and I think that there were probably some assumptions made early on that, this was maybe a drunk driver who had passed out and hit a pole, or someone who had fallen asleep, coming home. So they weren't terribly alarmed in those first few minutes, although Ronnie was not responsive. One of the cops shined a flashlight in her eyes and found that her pupils were fixed and dilated. So, not a good sign. So they rushed her to the hospital. Basically, Ronnie was dead when she left the scene, but they pronounced her at 1:12 a.m. at Cedars-Sinai, and upon transporting her, discovered the 4 bullet wounds. So now this goes from any form of like an accidental kind of thing, or a drunk driving accident or whatever. This now becomes obviously homicide. So for the next 2 weeks, the Beverly Hills Police Department combs through her life, her computers. They talk to her employees. They go through her emails. Basically, they spend their time poring over this woman's life and trying to figure out who would have had a motive to kill her, who would have done something like this. And they get a tip after 2 weeks of basically nothing. They find that, she's basically squeaky clean. She's a very reputable woman, has lived a very clean life. She runs a good business. She was never married. She didn't have any kids. She didn't have an ex-husband in the background here that was paying her some exorbitant amount of alimony or something. So there was nothing there. And around this time, around the end of November, they get a tip from America's Most Wanted. And this guy calls in, he identifies himself as John Doe. He remains anonymous. And he basically informs the police that he believes that an individual named Harold Smith, who is sort of this down and out kind of guy, he's an African-American guy, 42 years old, kind of between jobs, kind of between having places to live, a little bit on the transient side, and he has somewhat of a criminal record. And the tipster tells the police that that he has reason to believe that this guy is the one who shot Ronnie. So at that point, the police set out to the apartment building, the Harvey Apartments on Santa Monica Boulevard, and they attempt to question him. Well, when he comes into the lobby and the detectives are waiting on him, apparently they announce who they are and that they have some questions for him, although that's a little unclear as to what the exchange was. At this point, Harold Smith backs himself into a small corner where the tenants have mailboxes. And once he backs himself into this corner, he produces a pistol, puts it to his head, and shoots himself at point-blank range. Wow. So it's a suicide right in front of the cops. And the police, of course, needless to say, recover the firearm, which is later identified as a .38 handgun. And they conclude very quickly that Harold Smith was the perpetrator who killed Ronnie Chasen. And so case closed. And here we are basically 8 years later, still debating it.
Amazing. Fascinating. Now, the tip that he got, that was, because a lot of people inside that apartment building, which is, not the nicest area, to be honest. It's a little shady place. But they were getting a tip from, he was going around boasting that he killed her and he was getting $10,000 in cash from someone.
That's a myth. There's actually no truth to that.
There's no truth to that.
No truth to that. That seems to have been fanned by one individual who, went around to all the different TV cameras that she could talk to, and she told this fantastic story, that, oh yeah, he told me that he did it, and he was getting $10,000 and blah blah blah, and there is no truth to that. When I talked to some of the people that lived over there, the one thing that I got, and this came out of the mouth of the America's Most Wanted tipster himself, was that Harold never made any type of boast or never made any type of admission that he killed this woman. He never said anything to that effect. You know, he never indicated that he was involved in the crime at all. The rumor about the $10,000 seems to stem from other money that Harold received a month before the homicide. Harold had been, he rode around town. He didn't have a vehicle, so everywhere that he went on a BMX-style bicycle. And he was on the bike in approximately May of 2010. And apparently a passing pickup truck went by him, and the mirror, apparently the guy misjudged the distance between Harold and his truck mirror. The mirror clipped him, and the mirror knocked him off his bike, and Harold got, banged up a little bit, nothing terribly serious. And he had retained an attorney in Los Angeles, and the attorney had sued, on behalf of Harold and had ultimately settled. So Harold got around as I understand, about $15,000 was the settlement, okay? And after the attorney got his cut and after all of Harold's medical bills were paid, Harold received about $5,300, $5,200 the month before the homicide. So that seems to be the genesis of Harold telling people that he was going to come into some money. But of course, it's been kind of spun the way that things get spun. It's sort of spun into, he was getting this money because he was involved in something illicit and it might have been a hit, but there seems to be no truth.
He was a two-time offender in California.
He was a two strikes. Correct, Mike.
Sorry.
In California, we have what's called the three strikes law. And the three strikes law is basically on your third felony conviction, you're going away for life. Okay, and that's it. That was initiated after the death of Kimber Reynolds back in 1992. A guy, her father, by the name of Mike Reynolds, worked his butt off basically to get that legislation, passed. So we've had that on the books since, for almost 30 years. Anyway, Harold was indeed a two-strikes felon. But to explain a little bit about his criminal history, Harold was not a violent criminal, okay? He was a petty thief. And basically anything that he did somehow involved burglary or robbery or something along those lines. The reason that he was a two-strikes felon was because he attempted to take a purse and to rob a woman in Beverly Hills. And she put up a fight, and he ended up knocking her down, and he ended up, I believe, kicking her or punching her. And he ran off with the purse, and of course he got caught, But because it was basically an assault, and it was also a robbery, burglary, whatever you want to call it, that is what racked him up 2 strikes in one, for one event. So it's not like he had committed 2 separate felonies, far removed from one another or within a couple of years of each other or anything like that. It was one event that got him the 2 strikes. And it must be noted that he went to prison. He went for about a decade to prison as a result of those charges. And what has to sort of be noted in that is that when I was reading his sentencing, the sentencing documents, there was no enhancement whatsoever for any type of weapon. So because obviously, the way that the sentencing system works is, there's a prescribed number of years for a certain felony. But then if you use a knife or you use a gun or you use some kind of weapon in the commission of that crime, then they will also add to that. Okay. And they call that an enhancement. And in the case of Harold, there were no enhancements on his charges. So he did not use a gun. He did not use a knife. He saw a woman with a purse. He wanted the purse. That was his MO, was robbery. Okay. And he went to get the purse. If she would have given him the purse, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that anybody should just give in to an assailant. But if he would have handed her the purse, or she would have handed him the purse, he would have gone off on his merry way, and there would have probably been no harm to her whatsoever. In other words, my point in that, in studying his psychology and having some experts that I've consulted, in the course of making the film on the psychology, if Harold got what he wanted, he would have gone his own way. There would have been no violence. This is a guy who is a thief, okay, and he has been a thief his whole life. He started, getting in trouble in upstate New York in his juvenile years, okay, and that's all he's done ever since. There's no history of violence. There's no history of murder. There's no history of trying to hurt somebody, and that is what is so far off the reservation for me, in my opinion, in believing that he was the guy who killed Ronni Chasen. If Harold would have wanted to rob her, I believe he would have done it. I think that if he had a gun, he would have shoved the gun in her face.
Right,
okay.
Right.
And at that point, Ronni, according to her friend, she was no hero. Ronni would have gladly handed him her purse, her wallet, and probably the keys to the car at that point. The idea that he ran up to the passenger side window and shot this woman 4 times just is as they say, is completely off the reservation.
So during your investigation, Ryan, you don't believe that the murder occurred at Sunset and Whittier because of the street lights, the traffic light?
I am of the opinion now, after reviewing evidence. Initially, I had questioned where the crime took place, but I do believe, after seeing the crime scene photos that the BHPD turned over, I do believe it did happen in the intersection. But
okay.
there's some timing issues that don't make a whole lot of sense. One of the things I hear is, she was sitting at this light. It was this incredibly long light, and, that's what gave the perpetrator the opportunity to do this. But I went out to Sunset and Whittier, and I sat in the park with a watch, okay, and I tried to time out the lights at about 12:30 at night on a Monday night, okay? And what I discovered that the timing, there was no timing, okay? It was all based upon the movement of the traffic and vehicles stopping at the light. And so what this told me very quickly was that after a certain time, it became my belief at that point that the lights were on a sensor and not a timer. So I called Beverly Hills. I talked to a very, very nice individual in the traffic control center over at Beverly Hills, and he explained the traffic algorithms to me. And he explained that from like 6 a.m. to midnight, the lights are on timers. And those timers change, of course, based upon the pattern and the flow of traffic during the day. But at midnight, the light goes to a sensor. And the idea is, on Sunset Boulevard, in the words of this guy, was because Sunset is a major arterial, we want to keep traffic moving down Sunset as briskly and as efficiently as possible. So the night that Ronni was murdered, she should have come down Sunset heading west, and she would have had, assuming that there was no cross traffic at Whittier. And of course, we don't believe that there was, because there were no witnesses to the crime. Okay, so if there was no traffic on Whittier, Ronni should have, heading west on Sunset, she should have arrived at Sunset and Whittier in the turn lane, and she should have waited there just long enough for the sensor to trip the light for the oncoming traffic, okay, heading east, to go to red, and then she would have got a green arrow. We are talking a light that should have lasted all of maybe 20, 30 seconds. Okay, and there would have been no reason for her to be stopped for any length of time. So that came right out of Beverly Hills themselves. So I literally asked this individual. I said, can you come up with any reason why I would be sitting at that left turn, in that left turn lane for a prolonged period of time at that hour of night? And his answer to me was no. Now, I think if he would have known at the time who I was and what I was working on, his answer might have been a little bit different.
A little bit different. Ryan, so much mystery surrounding this murder, obviously. Retired LAPD detective Gil Carrillo, famous for solving the Night Stalker killings. In his professional opinion, and he said he's fired many weapons, he said that only a professional, the way the bullets entered Ronni Chasen, could have done this. Do you believe that?
I'm inclined to agree with Gil. I really am. Because here's the thing, one of the things that we have done in the course of making this is, I've got an excellent group of forensic consultants around me, criminologists, people who know how crimes happen, have a lot of experience testifying, in court. They're expert witnesses. They've spent their life doing this. And one of the things that we acquired in the course of making this film was we acquired a black Mercedes-Benz coupe identical to Ronnie's. Okay. And the whole purpose for that was obviously shooting recreations, of course, for the film, but the car also served as a forensic tool for us, because now having an actual twin of the car that Ronnie was driving, it enabled us to be able to take measurements. It enabled us to be able to plot trajectories. It enabled us to use the autopsy document to figure out, okay, Ronnie's 5'2", she weighs this much, she's sitting in this seat. We get a body double that matches her, put her in the seat, and now we figure out, based upon the autopsy report, the angle of the trajectories. And the thing about this is that Harold was not a marksman. Harold, by what I've learned about him, did not have any big degree of knowledge or experience with firearms, okay? And you're talking about a very tight cluster of shots, okay? You're talking about 4 shots. You're going to have the gun, every time you pull the trigger, the gun is going to recoil, okay?
Right.
I would find it very hard to believe, and I agree with Gil, okay, that this would be a very, very difficult series of shots to pull off if you were a complete novice with a gun. I mean, I couldn't do it. And we've tried this in our forensic exercises, and I couldn't do it. Okay. So I tend to lean towards the idea that whoever did this was intent upon doing this and knew what they were doing. The other thing too to understand is, and you'll see this in the finished film when we show the forensic exercises that we filmed. Harold was 6'2". Okay, this was a guy who was very tall. The Mercedes-Benz E350 coupe is a fairly low-slung car, and one of the things that you'll see in the film is the position that our body double playing Harold has to get himself into to try and fire the weapon. When you watch this, it becomes very implausible that a guy this tall would shoot and be able to achieve the trajectory of the bullets that went into Ronnie in the way that they did.
So I want to go back to the crime scene if we can real quick, Ryan.
Sure.
I know there's an issue with the ballistics. We'll get into that. But is there any evidence other than the ballistics, any witnesses, any passerbys that put Harold Smith at that crime scene?
Nothing. No. The very last report in the homicide file is narrative report number 0068. And narrative report 68, authored by Detective Hyon of the Beverly Hills Police Department, basically in a nutshell says that we are closing the case, that we don't really know what happened, that we have Harold Smith, that we have circumstantial evidence against Harold Smith, that we believe that Harold attempted a robbery, that the robbery went bad, and he shot her. The report literally states there is nothing to connect Harold Smith to this crime. Okay? And that was the report that they used to close the case.
And then he speeds away on a huffy bike. How is that even possible?
Well, according to them, according to the official narrative now, you have to understand that, he got around on a bicycle, okay? But according to the official narrative now, he ditched the bicycle in Beverly Hills, okay? And apparently he walked out of there. So my question is, how did let's face it, I know Beverly Hills, okay? I think that it would be very hard for any black man at 12:30 at night in Beverly Hills to get very far without some cop questioning, who he was and where he was going. And I mean, I'll leave it at that. It's Beverly Hills.
Right.
And so I find it hard to believe that this guy got out of a crime scene area where the cops are but like a minute away, okay, and heading that direction almost instantly. I cannot understand how he could have gotten out of Beverly Hills that fast without being detected. And here's the other thing, Mike. it's Beverly Hills. There are security cameras.
Right, exactly.
You probably can't go more than 3 inches in Beverly Hills, from one security camera to the next security camera to the next security camera. And we have nowhere.
No tape.
Nothing. We have no tape of
Amazing.
it. We have nothing. No one saw anything. Now, how is that possible?
And like you said, they heard gunshots. There's no witnesses. Nobody came outside to check around to see what's going on.
Well, the only time that any of the witnesses came out of the house was after the crash had occurred. And I mean, and it was like, it's just, none of this makes any sense.
Right.
There should have been somewhere surveillance footage of Harold, walking down a sidewalk, walking down the street, and nobody saw anything. Nobody got anything.
Maybe even prior to the murder,
Exactly. One of the things I started with when I made the decision to make the film, one of the decisions that I made was to go out to everybody in the neighborhood. And I sent probably 300 letters, 400 letters, and I did that 3 or 4 times. And I introduced myself and I said, this is who I am, and this is the film that I'm making, and this is what I'm doing, and I have a lot of questions about this case. And if anybody saw anything, can you please get in touch with me? Even if you think it's insignificant, it might end up being, noteworthy. And I did have a couple of very interesting things result from that came forward that ended up being reliable information. But, nobody, out of all those letters, out of all the contacts I made, nobody saw Harold Smith. Nobody saw anything.
Amazing. Folks, joining me on the phone is documentarian, investigative journalist Ronni Katzenbach, has done extensive research on the death of Hollywood famed publicist Ronni Chasen. I want to get back to Harold Smith if I can.
Sure.
So the night he kills himself with that weapon, I want to get into the ballistics. Did Beverly Hills Police Department release the findings of the ballistics related to the gun that killed himself? In other words, did they match?
Well, let me give you a little history on the gun. Okay, the gun is very interesting. The gun has got an interesting past. Okay, now this, at the suicide scene, of course, the police confiscate this gun that is identified as a .38 Chief Special. When they take the gun to examine it, they find that the serial number on the gun has been obliterated. Okay, but they are able to put it under a magnifying glass, basically, and they are able to finally decipher a serial number off of it. And they run the serial number through the database, and the serial number comes back to a shooting range in Orange County. So they call the shooting range in Orange County and they say, can you please check, do you have this gun? Shooting range checks, calls back and says, yes, we've got that gun in our possession. So they go back and they look at the serial number again, and basically what it was is they thought that a 6 was an 8 or something along those lines, and once they put the other number, the alternate number that they come up with through the database, the gun comes back reported to this guy who lives in Santa Clarita, California, and the guy is a retired LAPD officer. So they contact the guy and they tell him, we think we've got your gun. And he proceeds to explain that the gun was stolen 3 years earlier. As a result, there had been a fire where he lived, like a wildfire. And the neighborhood had been evacuated. And while the neighborhood was evacuated, supposedly this gun was stolen. And the gun had not been seen since. And now the gun shows up in Harold Smith's possession. And the gun was actually, this particular cop, the gun had been his service revolver while he was on the LAPD. And the BHPD asked him, well, how is it that you retired but you still have your gun? And he said, well, when I retired, the LAPD offered to sell me my service revolver, and I purchased it. So a quick check with LAPD verifies his story. He's telling the truth. And so, hence, that's the history of the gun. But we have no way of knowing whether we have no way of knowing how Harold acquired that gun. We have no way of putting that gun in Harold's hands on November 15th to 16th, 2010. The only thing we know is based upon what the police is telling us, that it was in his possession that night. Did he find it someplace? Did someone give it to him knowing that this gun was in some way hot? Okay, it's hard to say. Okay, and these are all questions that have been raised by my forensic people. They're saying, look, if you don't know when Harold got the gun, then it's hard to corroborate that this was the gun that he had on the night Ronnie died, if that makes sense. Okay, so
right.
The ballistics report, here's the problem I have with the ballistics report. They issue basically a 2-page document, and they say, well, yeah, it appears that this is the gun, that the round recovered from Ronnie, that the round recovered from Harold seem to be consistent with one another. But one of the things that's missing that I don't see, and I can't get an answer from anybody as to whether there are photos or not, because usually what happens is, and you probably understand ballistics, I think in this day and age, most people do. When a bullet goes down a barrel, okay, there are ridges in that barrel, of course, that cause the bullet to spin at a very high velocity, okay, when it leaves the barrel. And that's what makes the bullet go straight. Okay, so when a bullet comes out of the gun, it's got striations on it, and those striations can obviously be matched to the gun. So what they typically do is they take the revolver, they fire a test round, then they take the test round and they put the test round against the spent shell that came out of a victim or whatever, and they're able to match those up from one side to the other. They're able to look at the test bullet and the actual specimen, and they're able to conclude that, yes, this is the same gun. I have never seen, in all of this time, even despite my repeated requests, I have never seen any photographic proof that these bullets match. Okay, not one. And the other problem that I have is, Mike, I don't know, have you seen the photos of Harold Smith? There's some of them online.
Yes, I've seen them.
Okay, well, one of the other problems I have in particular is if you look at the photo of Harold Smith post-suicide, he is sitting on the floor there in the lobby of the apartment building, okay, and he's got the gun firmly planted in his right hand. And if you talk to any homicide investigator, okay, they will tell you that in a suicide situation, you very, very, very seldom ever find the gun still in the victim's hand.
Interesting.
And there was something about when I saw the crime scene photos that were taken, or I guess I should say the suicide scene photos that were taken of Harold at the Harvey, there just seemed to be something very, very scrubbed or very clinical about the overall scene. It just seemed like there was something wrong, and it seemed kind of a little staged to me. Now, the thing to understand about Harold's suicide at the Harvey apartments, okay, is that there were not less, I believe, than 3 cameras in that lobby that recorded this suicide. I have asked numerous times, I've asked the BHPD for a copy of that DVD because I want to, I want to see for myself what happened. He walked in, what was the exchange? What happened? Did the detectives pull their guns on him? Did they get aggressive? Did they simply stand there and introduce themselves? What motivated him to reach in his pocket and pull this gun out? The whole suicide should be on tape. It should be exactly right there. And these questions would all be solved if they would just release a copy of that tape. And of course the excuses raised, oh, well, it's graphic material. Well, we're all adults here, okay? We're all sitting at the adult table. I think we can all handle it, But for the greater good, it would answer the questions about did this guy commit suicide? And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist because I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a big believer in Occam's razor that the most logical answer is probably the prevailing one. But in this particular case, I can't take the word of the police department for it. I need to see it for myself.
And I think, Ryan, one key important component that the police may be missing is that, obviously Harold Smith committed suicide, but bear in mind that was a third strike with a handgun.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And one thing that is true, I will, because we talked about the money element, about the rumor that he was coming into money and the bragging, that oh, I did it, I'm the one that killed the publicist, and we know that those are not true. Okay, but the one thing that is true is that he did make statements to people that he had been to prison, he had spent a decade there, and he did say he was never going back. Okay?
Right.
Now, my question is, without knowing whether or not the Beverly Hills Police Department introduced themselves, not knowing what they said, the thing is that my question is, did Harold even know why they were there? He knew if they said to him, hi, we're the Beverly Hills Police Department, Mr. Smith, we'd like to ask you some questions. Would you mind coming with us? You raise a very valid point, Mike. He knew at that moment that if he had a pistol in his pocket, okay, he knew he was going away. Okay, that was an automatic strike
for
number
life.
3.
For life.
Exactly. Now, does that mean, is that in some way indicative of his guilt in association with Ronnie Chasen? Not at all. Okay. I mean, he could have, as we've discussed, he could have possibly thought, okay, I committed a robbery the other night. I held somebody up at an ATM. Oh, I did this. I did that. He could have thought that those cops were there for any number of different reasons.
Right. I mean, so, why do you think the Beverly Hills Police Department closed the case so quickly?
Beverly Hills Police Department was under a tremendous amount of pressure. Okay, Ronnie was a very high profile publicist. There was a lot of people following this, a lot of people demanding to know, how this happened, why this happened, who did this. And simply put, I think they were under a great deal of pressure, and they needed to generate some kind of result. And, hey, what better than the guy who committed suicide and killed himself? He's not going to speak out. He's not going to, plead his innocence. He's no longer here to defend himself. And that's one of the things that really bothers me the most.
Right. I mean, the Beverly Hills Police Department released 200 new pages of redacted documents. Did anything new come out of that?
Quite a bit of stuff, actually, but none of it was very flattering for the department. And that was one of the reasons why I think they fought so hard to not turn over the file, was because it reveals a lot of things that were not properly done, in my opinion, and in the opinion of my forensic experts. For instance, I'll give you one for instance. One for instance is that the car, after they took the car into impound, they had the car for about 7 months in impound before they released it. And so they had ample opportunity with the car to really go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And they did not do so. And for instance, one of the things that they did not do is they did not fingerprint, they did not do any work inside the car. Okay, one of the things that's very easily done is they have a super glue test that they can do, where they heat super glue and it releases a film inside of a confined space. And in that confined space, when they do this, the fingerprints show up. So the question becomes, why didn't you pull fingerprints? Why didn't you pull any stitch of evidence you could get from the car itself to determine? Because here's what we don't know. We don't know, was somebody else in the car with her? Okay,
right.
We have no idea. I mean, the odds are probably not, but you don't know that. As a homicide detective, as a retired NYPD homicide detective once told me, he said, when you go into a homicide scene, you clear your mind. Your mind zeroes out, okay? And you go in and you look at every single possibility. You can rule nothing out. You want to find out everything you can find out. Did this woman have someone in the car with her? Did they have a fight? Did that person shoot her and then get out of the car? Are there fingerprints? Are there hair fibers? Are there, whatever?
Exactly.
Okay? And you look at basically everything. And they really did not do that in this case. They also lifted prints off of the driver's side of the car. And there were no prints lifted off of the passenger side. So I thought that maybe this was incomplete. I thought maybe I didn't get the whole report. And come to find out, they didn't fingerprint the passenger side of the car. And I said, that's the most asinine, stupid thing I've ever heard. Okay? You are saying that Harold Smith attempted to rob Ronnie Chasen from the passenger side of the car. Okay? You're telling me that he didn't grab a door handle, that he didn't touch the car in some way? Why would you not? Why, if you're fingerprinting, if you're dusting the car for prints on the driver's side, why in the hell would you not do the passenger side as well? I mean, that's an automatic.
It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense.
No.
Now talk about a little bit, Ryan, about the tempered glass when the glass shatters. Right.
Well, on a lot of the cars nowadays, if you remember, let's go back into the 80s or whatever, when a tempered glass window would shatter, okay, that tempered glass window would send, 10 trillion pieces of glass all over the place, okay? Whereas today, a lot of the manufacturers, particularly the high-end manufacturers like BMW, Mercedes, Jaguar, Audi, Cadillac, those guys, they're using a lot more laminate now in the manufacturing of their automotive glass. And the reason that they're using more laminate is because it's sort of a sound deadening. It quiets the cabin of the car. So the interesting thing is with Harold, assuming that it was Harold, when Harold pulled the trigger on Ronnie, the interesting part about that was that the glass would have cobwebbed, but the laminate inside the glass, based on our tests, seemed to indicate that the window for the first one or two shots would have held together pretty well. And that we discovered was sort of a visibility issue. Okay, so literally the perpetrator would fire, the window would cobweb, and he wouldn't be able to see his target. So he would have to fire kind of blindly for the next couple of shots based upon kind of what we saw and what we determined, And the tempered glass, of course, falls out. It kind of crumbles. So the whole time that Ronnie left Sunset and went down Whittier, she was leaving a trail of tempered glass that was flaking out of the window and hitting the pavement as she was going. So if you look at the crime scene photos inside the car, the entire car is covered with glass. And inside, but then there's also glass particles all the way down the street as well. I can tell you that our actress who plays Ronni Chasen was more than thrilled with the gigantic box of broken glass we threw in the car at the 11th hour when we were doing recreations. That she was thrilled to work in those in that environment.
We got like 5 minutes left, but I want to make sure you get your film in there. Talk about your film 638, The Death of Ronni Chasen. Where's it currently stand?
Well, we are shooting recreations. We're shooting some more interviews. Kind of planning to have the largest portion of the film in the can by the end of the year, and we are pushing really hard for a 2019 release. We'd love to get it out next year. Obviously, there's some more heavy lifting to do, but we are exploring. The film explores the background of Ronnie. It explores the background of Harold Smith, and it really dives into the investigation. And I think that we may never catch the real killer, but I think we're going to definitely prove what didn't happen that night.
So, Ryan, in the time we have left, I just want to, in your investigation, which is so in depth, talk about what do you think, in your opinion, happened that night, if you can.
Well, in my opinion, in 20 seconds or less, in my opinion, I believe that this was probably a contract killing at this point. And people ask me, well, why? And I can say that there were probably between 8 to 10 million reasons why, and they're all called dollars.
Because didn't she give somebody $10 in her will?
She left a niece $10. That kind of had kind of a rough relationship going back a number of years. And her other niece got the entire estate, got the entire trust. And of course, she left a lot of money to charity. But one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is that there were various retirement accounts, and there were 401ks, and there were things above and beyond what the probate court, people think she was worth $6 million, but she was worth significantly more than that, because the retirement accounts and 401ks and some of that stuff went straight to beneficiaries. It did not go through probate. So there was a lot of people who benefited as a result of her death.
I mean, in Hollywood, in the film industry is very vicious. I mean, film financing alone is very vicious. I mean, who knows? You know what I mean? She made a bad deal with somebody who had contacts and connections.
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. I think our film is going to be very interesting, and it's going to reveal some things that a lot of people don't know about this case.
And you have a wonderful Facebook page where my audience can go like and check out the Facebook page at 638, The Death of Ronnie Chasen. I just liked it. It's a fantastic page and a lot of maybe unanswered questions. Real quick, Ryan, talk about the vibe of Hollywood, because it really rocked Hollywood to its core when that happened. Talk about what happened like the next day. What was going around town?
Well, I compare what happened with Ronnie Chasen. I don't think you've seen an entertainment industry as shook up since the Manson murders happened in 1969. Wow.
Right.
Because when the Manson murders went down, you had celebrities running around with packing loaded guns and everything else because nobody knew what it was about. Nobody knew why this had happened to Sharon Tate. And I think there was a similar response with Ronnie Chasen, because nobody knew what this was about. Why Ronnie? I mean, Ronnie could be a polarizing figure. Ronnie was an intimidating lady.
Right. I hate to interrupt, but she did have, from what I read, she did have a very bad temper. Maybe it could have been a case of road rage. You know what I mean? What is your thoughts on that theory?
My thoughts of road rage, that's actually what got me into this to begin with, because I used to live just south of Beverly Hills. And I used to take that route through Beverly Hills all the time. And the very first thing I heard was road rage. And I laughed because I said, road rage? Has anyone that's saying road rage actually driven through Beverly Hills at midnight? I mean, there's not a soul on the road. That's why you go through Beverly Hills.
Right.
The idea, and here's the other thing. There is surveillance footage of Ronnie's car going down Sunset. There are a couple of cameras that the police did catch up with and did see. And there's nothing out of the ordinary in any of that surveillance. Okay, it just captures her car passing. She's not being chased by anybody. And Mike, to touch upon the title of our film, 638, the title borrows from the length of time between the time that she made her last phone call to the office and left a voicemail message to the time when the Beverly Hills Police Department got the call reporting the collision. And so when in titling the film that, the idea was to sort of figure out what happened in the 6 minutes and 38 seconds in between. But when she hung up with the office, there was never any indication. There was nothing in her voice that indicated that she was being pursued, she was being chased, she was upset or frantic about anything. So I think that road rage is a pretty ridiculous. I don't buy into that for a second.
And to add to the mystery of this whole murder, I mean, she was killed on an area they call the Bermuda Triangle.
The Bermuda Triangle, yes.
Fascinating.
Yes. The Bugsy Siegel's house is like literally you could practically spit and hit Bugsy Siegel's house across the street, and of course the infamous Howard Hughes plane crash back in whatever year that was, I forget.
And I believe Jan and Dean wrote the song "Dead Man's Curve" about that area.
Yes, the Dead Man's Curve is right there near the park, right there on Sunset. So, yeah, it's kind of a very interesting area, and it's a very exclusive area. I think the cheapest house on the street's probably about $6 million. If you're looking for a nice starter home,
Yeah, really.
And
did she die in front of like Buddy Hackett's house? Is that true?
Buddy Hackett's house is just down the street. Buddy Hackett's house is actually one of the houses that captured some interesting surveillance footage.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Right. It's just such a fascinating murder. And I'm dying to see, pardon the pun, but I can't wait to see your documentary, 638, The Death of Ronnie Chasen. And, I want to have you back on when it comes out. So hit me up when it comes out, and I'll be following as well. And
you bet.
And for my audience out there, please visit his webpage at 638, The Death of Ronnie Chasen. Ryan, what can I say? This has been great, and I will stay in touch.
Please do. And again, thanks for having me on.
I will. Thank you so much, Ryan. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much.
You too.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us each and every Saturday right here on AM 1550 WNTM. And please go to 638, The Death of Ronnie Chasen. Again, thanks to Ryan Katzenbach for joining me this afternoon. So many unanswered questions to this case, folks. Do some research on it yourself. Google Ronnie Chasen. That's RONNI. And as always, please visit Apple Podcasts. Search Real Talk with the Hollywood Kid. We got some great interviews, past interviews up there. Johnny Russo, Frank Severo. The Murder of the Black Dahlia is also up there as well. That's REEL Talk with the Hollywood Kid. And please like our Facebook page at Real Talk with the Hollywood Kid. Again, folks, I don't know how much I can stress it to you people. Nobody is doing this type of show on the airwaves. Period. Bar none. Spread the word for us. Get the ball rolling for us. Tell your family. Tell your friends. As always, tell your enemies. Tell the mailman. Tell the garbage man. We are the best show on the airways. I challenge you to find a show that's doing this on the Boston airways. Again, thank you so much for the support, and we will see you again next Saturday at 2 p.m.